Hello and welcome to this bite-sized piece about personal resilience. We can't predict the future. We operate in a VUCA world, one that is volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. And personal resilience is arguably one of the powerful leadership competencies needed to succeed. So let's accept that change and disruption are the new norm and explore what we mean by resilience. Resilience is defined quite differently by various researchers, but most can agree that as a character trait, resilience is a person's mental ability to recover quickly from misfortune, illness, or depression. Now, life is never perfect, despite wishing things would just go away. Difficulties are inevitable and we all have to deal with them. But it's not the nature of the adversity that's most important, but it's how we deal with it. When we face adversity, resilience helps us bounce back, it helps us survive, recover, and even thrive in the face of misfortune. Resilience is complex because it can have different meaning between different people, communities, cultures, and societies. So, just to try to get us all on the same page, what does resilient behaviour look like? We use this term as the catch for all, encompassing a number of different behaviours and emotions and responses. And here are just a few. Resilience could mean how you handle tension and whether you handle tension effectively and how you recover. But it could also mean how you adapt in situations. It can also mean your ability to understand your emotions, why you feel the way that you do. It could also talk about how action orientated you may be and how much trust you have in the process and how you keep going and not give up. It can also refer to the trust that you have in the control over your own lives, and it can also refer to your capability of recognizing and learning from your mistakes. But it can also refer to knowing the value of support and being able to surround yourself with support when you need it. Now, let's be honest with ourselves. How many of these behaviours do you see and do you see regularly and frequently in yourselves? If I am very honest with myself, I can see some of them, but not all of them. But to help us really understand resilience, we need to look at this term stress as well, and understand the relationship between the two. Now, some types of stress may have a positive effect on our well-being and our productivity. Sometimes we refer to this as good stress. Some types of stress can make us healthier, can motivate us to be at our best and to help us perform at our peak. A useful way, I think, to think about stress is as a bell-shaped curve. But once we pass that peak or high performance apex where stress really motivates us, we can experience the unhealthy effects of stress, which, if sustained over a period of time, can lead to burnout. Now, arguably, our levels of resilience could help us change the shape of this bell curve and turn it from a bell curve to more of a plateau, meaning our performance stays at the same peak level as our stress levels continue to increase. But what causes us to respond in this way to start off with? Well, our brain does have something to do with this, because our brains are hardwired to look for threatening situations. This is what has kept us alive. If you think about it, our brain is there to help us find the threat and then to take steps to avoid that threat, and that's what's kept us alive. And even though we find the opposite of a threatening situation, which is a rewarding situation, even though we find that more pleasurable, our brains are constantly looking for the next threatening situation. And this is where threat is quite tricky, because rather than threat being a constant, what people consider threats depends on how many threats they've seen lately. And we are constantly comparing what's in front of us to its recent context. So, if someone has experienced a period that they found threatening, and this may have caused higher levels of stress and lower resilience, that recent experience becomes the new benchmark. So even if we experience fewer and fewer threatening situations, our brain expands our definition of threatening to include a wider range of situations. In other words, if we run out of threatening situations to find, we could start perceiving situations as threatening that we used to call harmless. So can you see how one incident of threat can reduce your resilience levels? And also how easy it could be to get stuck in that threatening and low resilience cycle. So how can we develop resilience and stay motivated in the face of increasing demands or complexity or change? Well, generally speaking, we feel, think, and then act. Irrespective of the event, our brains respond firstly emotionally and then secondly logically or rationally. So if our initial emotional response or feeling is negative, then this can drive our thinking and then our behavior. And the way that we can develop our resilience is by taking control of this chain of events and learning to recognize these feelings and thoughts right here can increase our resilience. Catching yourself here, that's important. Otherwise, it's hard to adopt a different behavior. It's not impossible to adopt a different behavior. It's not a foregone conclusion, but it's just harder. And what we want to do here is to develop our resilience, not just learn to recognize the signs that we aren't feeling very resilient. So if you catch your feelings at this point, what you can do is label it as what it is. This is my immediate emotional reaction. Break that chain of events and then consider your thinking, which then can lead you to consider a more rational and logical response. But how can we develop the ability to catch our feelings here? Particularly as we know our brains are not hardwired to work in this way. But we can help train our brains. And this doesn't happen quickly, but there are things that we can do over a period of time, which will then start to give us more control over our brains and enable us to break this cycle. Here are three things that we can start to do now, which very quickly will help us be able to manage that cycle of events. The first thing we can do is, as it says here, spend more time in the real world. What we mean by this is getting away from our screens and our computers and the online world and getting back into what is the real world, doing actual real world things, spending time engaged in hobbies, maybe as an example, or basically doing activities with very complex movements and rich sensory experiences. It's those movements and those sensory experiences that our brain doesn't get the more time we spend in front of a laptop or on our phone or on our computers. But it's those movements and experiences that provide a real valuable yield for our brains. That's how we can help keep our brains in check and show that we've got more control over them. Anticipation, it seems, is one of the world's strongest and healthiest highs. Now, why is that important from a resilience perspective? Because when we anticipate something, we get a dose of dopamine released in our brain. That's known as the pleasure chemical. Anticipation is pleasurable. It's something that gives us a good, positive feeling. Dopamine and anticipation can increase our resilience levels. So we should do more to try to keep this emotional high, dopamine, going longer throughout the year by ramping up the anticipation in our daily life. A way of doing that is trying to focus on delayed rather than immediate gratification. The longer you can pull that out, the more anticipation you have, the more dopamine that's released in your brain. So we could do things maybe like mapping out and planning a menu, shopping for your ingredients, cooking a meal. All of that eggs out the anticipation time, but also at the same time we're engaging with these complex brain engaging behaviours and these sensory experiences. So think about anticipation rather than immediate gratification. And finally, research shows us that to kill stress, you want to stimulate your brain actually and not cocoon it from the familiar or cocoon it in the familiar. So the trick isn't protecting your brain from anything that's new or moderately stressful, but instead getting out and exposing your brain, exposing yourself to maybe a little bit of a challenging world, but regular doses of moderately manageable stress levels to help build up your resilience. That might seem the wrong way round, but actually the more active and more nicely strained our brain is, the more we can build up our resilience. The more we stay within the familiar where we feel safe, the less resilient your brain is going to be. But as well as these three things, there are also a set of behaviours and skills associated with resilience. And you can learn to be more resilient by developing these traits and these behaviours. Research shows us that these are typical behaviours are associated with resilience. We've got a set of essential traits that are needed, and we've got a set of desirable traits that are needed as well. And I particularly like this tool because what we can use it in a number of ways. By considering these traits and behaviours, if you're good at self-reflection, you can reflect and assess yourself. Honestly, think about how many of these traits do you demonstrate, and do you demonstrate regularly and frequently? Maybe what might help is if you think back to a time when you did feel stressed and you did feel your resilience was low, and think about your behaviours, what you did and what you said. What traits were you exhibiting then? And then think back to a time when you did feel resilient and you weren't feeling stressed. What traits were you exhibiting then? If it's easier for you, if you're not a self-reflector, talk this over with someone who knows you but who will listen to you, ask you questions, and someone who's comfortable telling you the truth. But ask them the same kind of questions. When I was stressed on this occasion, what types of traits and behaviours did I demonstrate? When I was feeling strong in this situation, what types of traits and behaviours did I demonstrate? A coach would be really brilliant at doing this. But here's an interesting fact as well, though. As well as there being a set of behaviours that are associated with resilience, we've got a set of behaviours that can also be regarded maybe as a derailer. These are traits that can prevent us from developing our resilience levels. Even if we have all of the necessary essential or desirable traits, these traits here can counteract all of that good stuff. And these are the traits that could be preventing you from developing your resilience or be keeping your peak performance lower than your potential and ultimately holding you back. So again, think about maybe your self-assessment and your self-reflection, or again, ask for feedback. It's absolutely possible to have and be demonstrating some or all of these behaviours as well as the essential or desirable traits. They absolutely go together. So coming to the end of this bite-sized learning, here are just three things that I would like you to think about. What are the two things that most struck you about this session? And how could you apply those two things to yourself? Think about either personally or professionally. And because we need to then take action, what are the two things that you will try as a result of listening to this session? Feel free to go back and listen to all or parts of this session again if you want to dive into some more detail. But if you've enjoyed this webinar and you want to learn more, either for yourself or your organisation, please drop us a line, get in touch, and let's chat about how we can help you be the best version of yourself. Blue Grape, be the confident, capable and inspiring leader you deserve to be.